So how do we save our country? How do we save America? I'm a former member of the Black Panther Party from 1967 to 1971. So I'm familiar with moments that we find ourselves in today. I'm also a U.S. veteran from the Vietnam War. But I'm speaking today as an American citizen who lived through moments that we find ourselves in. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here because I recognize the pattern. And patterns don't warn you when they repeat. Where's America right now, today? Right now, families in America are just being torn apart by force of ICE and other law enforcement agencies. The armed federal agents are entering communities like occupying forces. Children are being handcuffed, families are being torn apart in minutes, and shootings involving federal agents are no longer rare, they're just becoming routine. This is not law enforcement as services we know and familiar with. This is the power turning inward onto the American people. When the government begins to treat its own people as a problem to be controlled, it is drifting away from democracy towards something far more dangerous. History has a word for that: autocracy. Let me be honest about what's happening, why this matters. A government that uses fear and force at home to terrifying communities is no longer acting as a servant of the people. And when institutions stop serving the people must reassert control. Here is what many Americans have forgotten. The Black Panther Party and the Civil Rights Movement did not create change by accident. They did not just march to be marching. We organized, we coordinated, we focused pressure. Every protest had a target. You must have a target. Every action must have a demand. You're marching because it's something that you want and you expect to get it from your participation in the march and expecting that the government is going to provide it, what you're demanding. So we targeted police departments, we targeted courts, we targeted city halls, and we also targeted businesses that was directly involved in the injustice we felt was being inflicted upon us. We staged sit-ins, organized, planned. We staged stand-ins, organized, planned. We had boycotts to stop commerce. Every march, every protest must have an objective. And you must be focused on that objective and have strategy to achieve that objective. If you don't have any strategy, you don't have a plan. So you're just planning to fail. But everything that you do, everything that you protest, every time you march, it must be nonviolent. If it's not nonviolent, you're just creating chaos. You're just making noise. So by having organization, focus, strategy, and goals, you can achieve the objective, which is to save our country. That is how institutions are forced to change, not chaos. So the politics are failing for this moment. Why the politics fail us? Is because politicians believe only in courts and procedure. It's not their fault. They're trained to think that way. But the courts move slow, and we don't have that kind of time. It takes months before a court can get through a ruling. And so those in Washington that creating these laws that daily they break constitutional norms themselves. But they expect for us to adhere to those constitutional norms and those constitutional laws when they're not even doing it themselves. So doing only what the other side does not respect. That's what we're doing. We're just doing what they don't respect. That's not a strategy. That's paralysis. You're not going to move forward. You're only going to move backwards, or you're going to remain in the same place. So you don't want to waste your time going out every day and then a week later realize that all those marches that you're doing has not created any effect on anything that you need to have an effect upon. In the 60s and 70s, something decisive happened inside the U.S. military. You won't see this on TV. You never seen this in a movie. You never read it in a book because it's not really talked about. Okay, but the United States didn't lose the war because of the Vietnamese. The U.S. Army, well, if we want to say they lost the war, but they didn't fight any efficient wars they could have fought because there was dissension in the ranks. The soldiers began to question unjust authority, not because they lacked courage, but because their conscience demanded it. And what triggered that shift in those soldiers? Those soldiers began to receive letters from home. Their loved ones was writing them, informing them of the problems and the oppressions and the racial issues that was occurring in America as the civil rights movement inside the country was at its height. And those civil rights movement letters from the loved ones affected the soldiers, and the soldiers' response wasn't conducive to what military rule. So those letters was very powerful. The letters was not angry. There was none threatening, but they were clear. The soldiers were fighting oppressed people and to come home to oppression when they returned back to the United States. So the letters weakened the blind obedience of the soldier. So the soldier didn't just take the illegal orders he was given anymore. He reacted to what was happening to the people that he loved back home. So the soldiers began to think. Like I said, you won't see this in a movie. It's not really talked about, not written about. You won't find it unless you talk to a Vietnam veteran. Okay, so today, the weapon that we need is not a letter, but we have a more powerful weapon. And that weapon is the internet. Your texts, your emails, calm conversations with people you love who wear uniforms. Send them texts 5-10 times a day, letting them know that their oath is to the Constitution. It's not to the politics. It's not to anyone that wants you to cause harm to the American people. We need to take our army back. We pay the taxes. We pay their salaries. It's ridiculous for us to just sit in fear, paying for someone that's causing you that fear, when that someone is your loved one or a loved one of an American that's living in the fear. Now, how ridiculous does that sound? So these men and women in law enforcement and the military, they are not the government. They are sons and daughters, our mothers and fathers, our brothers and sisters. And if anybody could sway them to do what's right, it definitely will be a family member. But like I say, I've seen it happen. I've lived it. I know it can happen. It happened in Vietnam. Their first loyalty is not to Washington. It is to you, their family member. You raised them. So it's to consciousness. They're conscious. And they'll respond. This is how we take our country back. We don't have to go out into the streets. We don't have to go having our lives threatened by ICE. We just have to use the weapon that we have. The most powerful weapon that we have at home is the internet and our phones to text our loved ones and tell them. We have 2 million, over 2 million man military and millions of law enforcement personnel. And if we look at each one of those members having at least 10 family members who love them, and they're getting emails and texts from them daily. So this is over 100. If you're looking at only 10, that's over 100 text messages a day. If each one is texting at least 10 times a day. That causes a problem for the military. The soldiers began to talk to one another. They began to think about what's happening in our country. And it's a country that they too love themselves. So it becomes a narrative and a conversation amongst the ranks. And people's consciousness will tell them how they need to react and respond. So what it does, we just target nonviolent pressure on institutions, combined with daily moral contact within them to our loved ones. One conversation, one message, repeated, coordinated. This does not cause chaos. This is focus. This is not insanity, and it is not madness. This is sanity restoring balance. If we Americans act together, calmly, lawfully, and with purpose, we can stop this. We can save America. Former Black Panther. We'll talk later. Power to the people.